They invited me to their villa with warm smiles and the practiced ease of people who believed they'd rehearsed every moment. For the first day they hovered, attentive, bright. Then one morning they were gone, swallowed by appointments and excuses that stretched into days. I told myself I was welcome. Trust had always been my first assumption. But trust, I was learning, can be the smoothest disguise. I was folding fresh sheets in the linen cupboard when my fingers hit cold metal. A small safe, its latch slack as if hurried hands had left it unfinished. It shouldn't have been there. Villas keep secrets in plain sight. The door opened with a negligent ease and a stack of letters slid into view, tied with a tired rubber band. No trinkets, no cash. Just paper, old, folded, intimate. The top letter was mine. I recognized the smudged ink, the way a particular sorrow had bent my phrases. It was a note I had written to Thomas the winter after his operation, folded and stained the way grief makes paper look. My breath lodged in my throat when I saw it, and then the margins, neat, small, a different hand that had circled phrases and added comments. Evelyn's handwriting. My private words annotated as if they were data points. Below that, an unsigned draft of a power of attorney. My name printed at the head, my name again, almost perfectly signed at the bottom. It was too smooth, every curve practiced until it lost the tremor I'd earned from years of nursing and the arthritis that made my loops stutter. Whoever had forged it had studied me. They'd learned the lie of my pen. The worst found its way into a typed memo between Evelyn and a man I had overheard once at dinner, Dr. Harold Vance. Clinical phrases sat on the page like a scalpel. The elderly mother is a liability, reframe payments as gifts, position housing as care and cost. In the margins, Evelyn had written short notes. Nathan will accept stability. Emphasize children's needs. The words arranged me into categories: risk, expense, leverage. I sank onto the cool tile with the letters splayed around me like evidence. The chipped teacup I had brought, the one Thomas and I had used every morning, felt suddenly more truthful than the polished surfaces of the villa. It was small and imperfect and kept its history where the marble counters and glass cabinets could not. I set it on the worktop as if setting a stake. I am not invisible. Memories swept in, late nights holding hands in hospital corridors, whispered promises to keep the family together. Those moments had been real. Here on glossy paper they had been catalogued as bargaining chips. The realization burned colder than the metal of the safe. They had kept my past like currency, ready to spend when it suited them. I pressed my palms to the floor and listened to the house breathe. Each echo felt like a tally mark against me. For years I had equated silence with peace. Now I saw silence as a strategy. But there was also a quieter truth. The life inside me could not be reduced to an expense report. The letters had intended to fold me neatly away, but paper is stubborn. It creases, it tears, it keeps the imprint of what touched it. I gathered the envelopes slowly, feeling like someone assembling a case against time itself. The villa's brightness seemed suddenly brittle. Outside, palms leaned into the breeze, indifferent. I straightened, clutching my old letter to Thomas like an amulet. The teacup caught the light and threw back a small, imperfect reflection. They had planned to let me fade, to frame my departure as care, to dress up a transfer of property as benevolence. But in that kitchen, surrounded by their clean surfaces and tidy plans, I made a different calculation. I would not be their quiet problem to be managed. I would not hand them the script they expected me to read. I folded the papers into my bag with hands that had steadied. I took the teacup. As I left the villa, the house remained immaculate and unaware, its order unchanged by the storm of intent it had harbored. I walked out holding the small things that proved I had been here. Not as a liability, not as leverage, but as a person who remembered how to keep a vow. I understood then that silence could cut in two directions. It could mend or it could wound. And in that villa, silence was the sharpest blade, slicing me apart piece by piece. But to see how it began, I have to return to the day I first stepped across its threshold. Andrew, my only son, greeted me with a wide smile, keys dangling in his hand. "Mom, this place has so much room. You'll have your own space. The children will love having you here." Evelyn stood beside him, her lips curved but her eyes unreadable. She set a bottle of white wine on the marble counter with a handwritten note tucked beneath the ribbon. "For your quiet evenings. Thank you for everything." It should have warmed me. Instead, something in my chest tightened. The villa was immaculate, every book aligned by color, every towel folded with precision, as if human hands were not meant to disturb them. No photographs, no clutter, no softness. Even the air felt prepared. A blend of lemon and eucalyptus, too clean to be real. When they left for their sudden trip, their embrace was stiff, polite. Suitcases slid into the car, doors shut, and their wave to me felt less like family and more like a transaction. "We trust you," Andrew had said. I would learn that sometimes trust means test, sometimes it means trap. That first evening I made tea in my chipped old cup, the one piece of life I had carried with me. I sat by the wide window and tried to convince myself I belonged. But the silence here was not gentle. Pressed in tight like judgment. It felt as though the villa itself were watching me. Then came the discovery. The safe, its latch left imperfectly shut, a metal mouth half open. I never set out to pry, but when something is left ajar, curiosity feels less like sin and more like survival. Inside, the papers whispered a truth that struck harder than any confrontation. Letters detailing forged signatures, my own name replicated with too much perfection. A draft of a power of attorney I had never written, authorizing transfers I had never agreed to. Notes of property sales hidden from Andrew himself. Evelyn's careful script in the margins, clinical and neat, reducing me to a role. The quiet mother, compliant, unseen. I held one letter to my chest, the ink faint beneath my fingers. For the first time in years, my heartbeat was not dulled by resignation but sharpened by clarity. I had not been invited here out of kindness. They had invited me to serve a purpose. The silent matriarch, pliant and blind. I folded the paper, placed it back in the stack, and whispered into the emptiness of the villa. "Not this time." My chipped teacup stood on the counter, a stubborn contrast to all their polished chrome. I poured myself another cup, steadied my breathing. Beyond the walls, the ocean moved with its endless rhythm. Inside, another rhythm throbbed, betrayal waiting to be uncovered. That was the true beginning. I was 69 when I learned the difference between being offered a house and being offered a home. Widowhood had already hollowed my world. Thomas's absence left our rooms feeling like exhibits behind glass. I kept his coffee mug on the shelf, his toolbox under the sink. I had worked 40 years as a nurse in a small Florida hospital, learning to read pain in the grip of a sheet, in the tremor of a breath. After he was gone, grief made even dust seem sacred. Andrew is my only child. He came late, luminous, a boy who adored maps and neat sneakers. He grew into a man who prefers plans to people, schedules to sentiment. The day he handed me those villa keys, his voice was warm but his eyes moved like an overseer. There's space. Privacy. The kids will be thrilled. He wanted to mean well. But wanting and doing are not the same. When Andrew tries to love, he builds a structure. Sometimes the structure replaces the person. And sometimes, the silence inside that structure is louder than any voice. Evelyn is my daughter-in-law. She has the kind of elegance you find in glossy magazines, linen dresses in pale tones, sandals that never seem to wear down. She is neat in a way that edits people as easily as furniture. Her smile sits on her face as if practiced, but it never quite travels to her eyes. She handed me a bottle of white wine the day I arrived and thanked me for everything. I wanted to ask her what everything meant. Instead, I thanked her in return. Years as a nurse had trained me to be polite when the air was heavy. The villa stood above a narrow run of water, white walls and pale stone catching the light. Glass stretched so wide it felt too fragile to touch. The kitchen island blended into the pale floor so perfectly that the sunlight seemed to slide across the room without stopping. A diffuser released eucalyptus into the air, that strange mix of spa and hospital. Books lined the shelves in color order, not by memory or use. No family pictures. No chipped bowls for keys by the door. No sagging chair shaped by someone's weight. I tried to bring something real into it. I placed my chipped teacup by the sink, its crack running down like a thin bolt of lightning. On marble and chrome it looked out of place, a bruise on stone. To me, it carried mornings with Thomas, the small quarrels over crossword clues, the warmth of a hand wrapped around porcelain. Here it looked like a stray in a world of polished glass. Still, I left it where I could see it. I needed a witness that had lived through both time and grief. During those first days, I tended to Evelyn's orchids with the same careful touch I once gave 4 lines. I folded towels in thirds because that was the way she liked them. People like Evelyn have opinions about the grain of fibers. I lined shoes against the baseboard so their soles kissed the wall. I told myself that kindness, if freely chosen, was not servitude. But then I began to hear the ways a house speaks. Doors slid shut behind me when I hadn't touched them. Motion lights woke the hallway as I passed, their glow like an eye opening to say, "Remain useful." When Evelyn smiled at me, I felt inspected. It wasn't anger. Anger has heat. It was judgment, cool and precise. She would remark on which napkins I used or how I folded shirts. She never shouted. She simply trimmed away my space inch by inch. With Andrew at her side, she fit into a picture-perfect frame. Together they looked like the front of a brochure. Beside them, I felt like the small print at the bottom. The day they left for their sudden trip, her smile was polished, his was tired. I watched their car fade down the drive, the quiet of the villa rising like a tide. Beauty filled every corner, but beauty can be armor. That first evening I brewed tea and held my cup at the window. The ocean lay flat and gray beneath a tall sky. I tried to believe this was about family. That gratitude could turn a showroom into a home. But grief had already taught me another lesson. Grief makes you neat. convinces you that if you keep everything in order, chaos will pass you by. So I stacked my days with chores, with slow walks behind the villa, with old voicemails from the grandchildren until the phone grew warm in my hand. I told myself I would be the kind of guest who left no trace. Then I remembered, I am not a guest in my own life. I am a mother who kept a family together through storms. I am a woman who knows the difference between courtesy and a test. Evelyn labeled pantry jars like a laboratory. Andrew checked the thermostat twice each night as though comfort could be trapped by numbers. They gave thanks instead of conversation. Each morning I placed my teacup in the same square of light. I waited for warmth to turn into welcome. It did not. That chipped cup marked me more than it welcomed me. Standing there, I understood that the villa's perfect order could not tell me who I was. It could only show me what I had become to them. The garden stretched like something staged for a magazine. Orchids stood in even rows, their roots trapped in glass pots, pale blooms frozen in place. The grass looked carved, each blade trimmed with military precision. When Andrew and Evelyn left, they reminded me not to overwater, not to underwater. Their voices lingered in my ear each morning as I carried the little watering can across the patio, tilting it with the same steady care I once gave 4 bags. I tried to treat the villa as though it were mine, but the villa resisted, its perfection stiff in my hands. In the linen cupboard, every towel was lavender-scented, folded into perfect stacks. I laid my hand across the neat rectangles and remembered my old cupboard at home. Towels in a jumble, some worn thin, others soft with years, corners frayed by use. There, children wrapped themselves after swims, Thomas reaching for one with wet hands, laughter echoing in the hallway. Here the stack seemed untouched by living. At the dining table I spread one of Evelyn's embroidered cloths. Its crisp fabric held no meaning for me. I smoothed the edges with the same care I once gave a patient's sheets, remembering Thomas with his newspaper, glasses sliding down his nose, humming when the coffee was strong. Now I ate toast alone and the silence hummed instead. The cupboards glittered with crystal glasses lined in ranks. I lifted one, its rim so thin it seemed barely there. It rang softly against its neighbor. I thought of the mugs Thomas preferred, heavy and sturdy, the kind that survived a fall. Every Sunday we sat by the window with eggs and coffee, him with his mug, me with my chipped cup. Those mornings were plain, but they were alive. The villa had crystal but no pulse. I filled afternoons with small tasks, sweeping the patio, polishing silver, turning pantry jars so every label faced forward, because Evelyn would notice if they did not. Each act felt less like living and more like rehearsing someone else's script. Even the steady scent of eucalyptus and lemon pressed into me like a uniform I had never chosen. Sometimes I stood at the doorway between kitchen and living room, uncertain if I was even meant to sit. It is a strange thing to live in rooms where every surface tells you to behave. So I began walking outside, searching for air not filtered through someone else's taste. That was when I met George. He lived in the house next door, a man in his 70s with a back bent but not beaten. His yard was scattered the way a yard ought to be, tools resting by the fence, a boat trailer rusting in the grass. He had been a sailor, I learned, working cargo ships along the coast. His voice carried the weight of the sea, rough but patient. The first time he saw me, I was kneeling in the orchid bed, brushing soil from my gloves. He leaned on the fence and said, "You're new here, I smiled beneath my hat. Not new, just visiting. My son and his wife asked me to watch the house. George glanced at the villa, its white walls gleaming too clean like bleached bone. Pretty place, he said. But pretty doesn't always mean warm. I laughed before I realized I had forgotten how. His bluntness startled me, but it also loosened something in my chest. You noticed it too? He asked with a shrug. Houses talk. Some open their doors to you, some keep their arms crossed. That one, he tilted his chin toward the villa. It doesn't look like it wants company. I liked him right away. His voice carried the weathered honesty of someone who had watched storms roll in for most of his life. We lingered on small things, the shifting clouds, the tide scraping against the seawall. He told me he sometimes sat out at dawn listening for gulls because silence felt different near the water. His words clung to me. I was living in silence too, but mine was the kind that pressed down heavy, not the kind that lifted. That evening inside the villa, I carried my chipped teacup to the counter. The tiny crack along the glaze felt warm beneath my thumb. I poured hot water and watched the steam coil upward, remembering Andrew's low hum that used to fill our kitchen. For a fleeting moment, I almost heard it again, as if silence itself could bend backward and return him to me. But when I opened my eyes, the house reminded me who I was here. Temporary. Every polished surface, every rigidly placed object seemed to wait for Evelyn's inspection. The orchids in the hall stood in perfect rows, each bloom too exact, too watchful, like a row of glass eyes. I thought of Thomas's words. Houses talk. This one told me clearly I did not belong. I slipped back outside into the garden where the night air felt closer to something real. I placed my hand on the fence where Thomas had leaned earlier. The wood was rough, splintering, alive. I breathed deeply. It wasn't comfort, not yet, but it was nearer to life than anything inside those gleaming walls. I whispered into the dark as though to Andrew, I am still here. The words were soft, but in them, a defiance rooted itself, steady as a plant cracking through stone. I found the safe by accident. Reaching for a table runner in the back of the linen cupboard, my knuckles brushed against cold metal. Behind stacked towels hid a small door, its latch sitting askew as though closed too quickly, or perhaps never meant to be sealed at all. I pressed at the edge and it gave. The hinge released with a quiet sigh. No code, no key, just surrender. A shaft of sunlight from the kitchen window cut across the shelf inside. In its glow lay a bundle of envelopes, bound with a frayed rubber band. The top one was thick, cream-colored, the handwriting leaning slightly forward. The corner bore a return address, Dr. Harold Vance. I remembered Evelyn mentioning his name once, clipped between words like strategy and timelines. Sliding a butter knife beneath the flap, I lifted. Evelyn, the letter began. And then came the instructions. If Thomas resisted signing the revised trust this month, pressure his mother. Encourage guilt. Present housing as a form of debt, of care disguised as cost. Keep everything off text and email. I read the lines again. The surface civility drained away, leaving only a diagram. I was not Margaret anymore, not someone's wife or someone's mother. I was a lever. My care had been turned into currency, my presence reduced to an entry on a ledger. I opened the next letter. Vance detailed a draft of power of attorney. He suggested a signature could be replicated from old checks or cards. If we act decisively, he wrote, the villa can be refinanced or liquidated with limited resistance. I walked to the sink and turned on the hot water. Steam clouded my face. My hands scrubbed themselves, the way they once did after long nights in the surgical ward. But no matter how clean, hands cannot uncarry what they've touched. When the fog cleared, I returned to the counter and opened a third envelope. In the margins, in neat, tight strokes, was Evelyn's own handwriting. She had underlined the phrase emotional leverage and scribbled in the margin, Thomas will agree if it's framed as stability for the children. An arrow pointed to a line about my contribution to the down payment. Beside it, Evelyn had written a single word: gift. That word struck harder than the rest. A gift is something that carries thanks but erases claims. A gift can be praised aloud and forgotten on paper. I remembered the day clearly, standing at the bank after a double shift, still in my nurse's shoes, my shoulders aching. Andrew had been frantic on the phone, his voice caught between hope and fear. Evelyn's tone calm, measured. I told myself I was helping my only son into a home, building a future table where my chair would always be waiting. I stacked the letters neatly into one pile. Order steadies the pulse. Mine didn't race. It settled the way a hospital room steadies when the emergency team arrives and every hand knows its task. Some moments in life demand a choice, to fold or to stand. I stood even if the ground beneath me was borrowed. I carried the stack to the dining table. The diffuser pushed a clean scent into the air. The villa thrummed with curated calm, the kind that feels staged. Beyond the glass, the seawall cut the tide into a sharp edge. I reread the first letter, then drew a pen from my purse. I circled the line about using me as leverage and wrote my name in the margin. Margaret. Not mother as a tool, not a line item on a balance sheet. A person. A woman who had held a household together through lean years, through long nights. The word indebted echoed in my mind like a bell. Indebted for what? For tending strangers through fevered nights? For raising a son through every storm of childhood? For the check that transformed this villa from an address on paper into a place with walls? If debt existed here, the ledger was not against me. Something inside me loosened. Not fury but alignment, bones sliding back where they belonged. I thought of Thomas next door, leaning against his weathered fence, saying houses talk. This one had told me I owed it obedience. These letters told me their scheme relied on my silence. But silence, once it speaks, unravels every plan drawn in ink. I placed the letters back in the safe, though not before photographing the opening page. Habit and training value, a complete record. I returned the stack precisely as I had found it, the door left slightly ajar like a mouth feigning closure. Then I washed my chipped cup, dried it with one of Evelyn's immaculate towels and set it on the stove. Small against the marble, it looked almost defiant. A bruise that refused to fade. Perhaps even a flag. I am a nurse by training. My work has been to clean wounds, chart truth, and steady my voice where panic might kill. I have spent a lifetime keeping others alive. I have earned the right to keep my own dignity breathing. I am not leverage. I am not debt. And I will not be silent now. The next morning I went back to the linen cupboard. I told myself I meant only to straighten the shelves, but my hand reached for the safe before reason could intervene. The latch still hung loose. Inside, the stack of letters waited like an unattended patient file. I lifted them out and carried them to the table, where sunlight stretched a bright square across the surface. The envelope I opened was thinner, its flap sealed with tape. Inside lay a draft of a power of attorney. My name stood printed at the top, followed by clauses granting the right to sign, to transfer, to sell. At the bottom in ink was my signature, or rather a version of it. A forgery wearing my name. My breath caught and held. Whoever had traced my name knew the tilt of my H, the long loop of the M, the downward curve of the G. But it wasn't my hand. I held the page closer and thought of the hospital years ago when signatures determined who received care and who did not. I remembered one frantic night when a man needed surgery and his wife was too distraught to steady her pen. I pressed the pen into her palm, guided her trembling hand to the line, whispered, "Sign, please, or he will not survive." She signed, and the surgeons carried him into the theater. Her name saved him. Now a false version of my own threatened to erase me. The symmetry cut deep. A mark I had once trusted as a lifeline had become a blade against me. I opened another envelope. This one was longer, typed on Dr. Harold Vance's letterhead, but Evelyn's handwriting laced the margins. The subject line read, "Property Strategy, June." The body outlined refinancing options, potential transfers of ownership, the possibility of a quiet sale if the market improved. Evelyn had underlined future stability. Beside it, in her careful hand, she wrote, "Andrew must see this as responsible." I set my palm flat on the paper and closed my eyes. I remembered the day Andrew and Evelyn first dreamed of this villa. He had called in a panic. She had spoken with the calm of someone who had already decided the answer. I walked into the bank still in my nurse's shoes after a night shift, my shoulders aching, my mind weary. I pulled from the savings Robert and I had built for the years we never got to share, and I handed it over. I told myself I was helping my son secure a home, that I was investing in family. I told myself it meant I would always belong at their table. Now these documents stripped my offering into nothing more than a gift, something praised in words but erased in practice. I sat very still, letting the house hum around me. The diffuser pressed its fragrance into the air. The refrigerator clicked, steady as a metronome. A light blinked on as if the walls themselves were watching. For a moment I could not tell if I was breathing or if the villa was. Another memory surfaced. Nights in the ward when I signed medication orders one after another, my pen scratching like rain against paper. Nurses cannot hesitate. Hesitation can cost lives. I trusted that my name written down was a promise, an anchor of truth. Now I saw it bent into a tool wielded against me. Someone had taken the shape of my hand and turned it into permission I never gave. I touched the margins where Evelyn's notes ran tidy and graceful. The beauty of her script only sharpened the cruelty beneath it. She had taken my years of work, my sacrifice disguised as numbers, and folded it into her plan as if it were currency she had earned. The ink whispered, "You were generous, but generosity leaves no claim. You gave once, now you must give again." Tears pricked, but they did not fall. I had spent too many years drying the tears of others. My own rarely came. Instead, I felt a burn deep in my chest, heavy and unshakable. It was not the grief of sudden loss, but the grief of being useful until you are not, thanked until the ledger tilts and you are counted as debt. I slipped the pages back into their envelopes. My hands did not tremble. They were steady as they had always been when lifting fragile infants or adjusting 4 drips 1 drop at a time. Nursing had trained me to act when pain surfaced, not simply to watch. The villa looked the same as before. The orchids stood tall in their glass pots. The crystal glasses gleamed. The towels rested in their neat folds. But nothing was unchanged. I knew now that my place in this house was not a place at all. It was a calculation, a margin note in someone else's plan. I carried my chipped teacup to the sink, filled it with hot water, and stood as steam rose into my face. The crack in the glaze caught the light like a scar, proof of endurance. I breathed into the chipped teacup as if it might carry my words to him. I told it, and Robert's memory, that I was never a gift to be erased. I was the foundation. The thought settled like a decision. I could not go on as I had. Silence had once protected me. Now it was consent, and I would no longer consent to vanish. I spread the envelopes across the dining table and watched the sentences stare back, unblinking. For hours I moved through the villa, opening drawers, easing cabinet doors, looking for any other proof of the plan. Each room murmured the same thing. You are temporary, you fill a space of order, not a space of warmth. Night folded itself over the house until the quiet felt thick enough to choke. I poured tea into my cup and stood at the window. The moon turned the ocean to a slow, patient silver. My reflection hovered in the glass. Tired eyes, hair threaded with gray, shoulders curved from years of holding other people's weight. I felt small in that polished kitchen, but the anger rising within me made my spine straighten. My thumb hovered over my phone. It had been years since I'd spoken to Mary. We had worked side by side through countless shifts, shared alarms and whispered hopes at dying beds. After Thomas died, I had retreated. She sent cards, photographs of her grandchildren, invitations I let go unanswered. Still my finger moved before doubt could stop it. I found her name, tapped and waited. Her voice came on the second ring, older and familiar. "Margaret? Is that you?" "It's me," I said. My throat clenched. "How are you, love?" She laughed a little, the sound steady. "Complicated, I suppose. Tell me what's happening." I told her everything. The villa, Andrew and Evelyn's sudden trip, the orchids, the safe, the letters, the forged signature, the strategy memos. I said the word leverage and my voice trembled. She listened the way a nurse listens, patient without interruption. When I finished, there was a quiet on the line, then she spoke, precise and direct. "If this were a patient, would you let an infection sit?" she asked. "Would you hope it heals without treatment?" I closed my eyes and felt the truth land like a practiced hand. "No," I whispered. "Then you know what to do," she said. "You'd clean it out, drain it, stitch it. Infection ignored becomes blood poisoning. Betrayal ignored becomes something worse." Her words stung like antiseptic and then soothed. I held the phone tighter. "But he's my son. I don't want to hurt him." "You already sheltered him his whole life," Mary reminded me. "You protected him when he was a child. This isn't a child you're shielding now. This is a grown man who stands silent while his wife rewrites your place on paper. Protection isn't silence, Margaret. Sometimes protection is saying no." I bit my lip until metal filled my mouth. He was right. I had been confusing love with erasure. Mary's voice softened. "Listen. I left nursing 5 years ago. I'm working as a paralegal in a family law office now. If you want, I can look at what you found. I can point you to someone who knows how to handle this. You don't have to do it alone." Relief and resolve braided together inside me. That night the villa felt different. The same surfaces gleamed, the same orchids stood in regimented rows, but I felt less like an actor reciting someone else's stage directions. I had called a witness. I had a plan forming in the steadier part of my chest. I would not let the ink that bore my name be used to erase me. I had kept people alive for decades. Now I would keep my dignity alive. The chipped cup steamed in my hands, and for the first time in days the warmth felt like belonging rather than a bruise. Margaret stood at the kitchen counter, the weight of Mary's words still echoing in her chest. "Don't let yourself bleed out in silence." That phrase had lodged itself deeper than any wound she'd ever dressed in the hospital. Her hands, once steady through emergencies, hovered now with a strange certainty. The stack of letters on the dining table no longer looked like chains. They looked like evidence. She pulled them close, smoothed the papers flat, and studied every word with the same focus she once gave to heart monitors and lab reports. Each forged flourish of her name felt like a vital sign gone wrong. Each margin note was a symptom of betrayal. She lifted her phone, the camera clicking as she captured every page, careful, methodical. It was the same discipline she had carried through 20 years of nursing. Precision, detail, unshakable calm when it mattered most. When she finished, she gathered the most damning ones. The instructions in Andrew's handwriting about positioning assets, Evelyn's sharp notes in the margins reducing her life's sacrifices to mere leverage, and the draft that twisted her signature into something she never gave. These she placed into a plain envelope. She wrote her name and address in clear, deliberate script, then sealed it with a firm stroke of blue ink taken from Thomas's fountain pen. It was not for show. It was to remind herself that her hand still wrote this story. For the first time in weeks she stepped outside the villa. The Florida sun pressed hot against her face, bright and real. She walked down the quiet street to the post office wedged between a pharmacy and a bait shop. The doorbell chimed as she entered, and the air smelled faintly of cardboard and ink. The young clerk behind the counter looked up, freckles scattered across her nose. "Good morning," she said brightly. Margaret slid the envelope forward. "Certified mail, please." The clerk stamped it with brisk efficiency, slid over a receipt and handed it back with a smile. Margaret tucked it into her purse, feeling the small slip of paper like armor against her ribs. When she stepped back into the sunlight, she did not feel erased. The villa was still immaculate, still waiting with its curated silence, but she was no longer trapped inside it. Her shoulders pulled straighter, her steps steadier. She had begun something, and beginnings carried their own kind of strength. That night she stood by the window with her chipped cup of tea, the ocean shifting under the moonlight. Her reflection no longer seemed as fragile. The line of her jaw was firm, her eyes clear. She whispered into the quiet as though Dr. Harold Vance himself might have been listening. "I will not fester. I will heal." "Can I help you, ma'am?" the clerk asked. "Yes," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I'd like this mailed to myself. Certified." She weighed the envelope, folded a corner of white paper under a postage stamp, and pressed a red seal into the corner. The stamp's thunk sounded louder than it should have. She slid a small receipt across the counter. All set. It'll arrive in a few days. I slipped the slip of paper into my wallet. That thin rectangle felt heavier than the crystal in Evelyn's cabinets. A tiny, impartial witness marking that time had taken notice. Outside, the sunlight felt honest against my face. I whispered under my breath, "I don't need noise. I need proof." The phrase settled into me like a talisman. For years I had equated stillness with safety. I smoothed trouble with silence, thinking that if I said nothing the house would remain intact and family would stay whole. But I had learned that peace founded on silence is brittle. Truth asks for records. On my way back I passed Thomas's fence. He looked up from his work and waved. "Morning, Margaret." "Morning," I replied. I thought about telling him everything, but some acts are stronger when they are kept between the hand and the page until the moment they must be shown. Instead I smiled and kept walking. Inside the villa, I set my purse down, boiled water, and cradled my chipped cup until steam curled like memory. The tide moved against the seawall, indifferent and reliable. For the first time in weeks, the house felt less like a watching thing and more like a place I held stewardship over. I sorted the photographs into a folder and labeled it simply, "Evidence." Nursing taught me the ritual of labels. A mislabeled vial can kill. A mislabeled file can be the difference between justice and erasure. I would not make that mistake. As dusk settled, I lit a candle on the table. The flame threw the letters' shadows across the table, making the ink look like small moving hands. I thought of how casually others had handled my name in my years. Tonight the pages were under my care. I opened a plain green journal and wrote, "Today I mailed the truth to myself. These words will not disappear on my watch." That night I lay awake listening to the villa's sensors click and the distant lap of water. The safe no longer felt like a hungry mouth. Whatever it held was poison, yes, but poison could be neutralized if treated with care. Evidence, I decided, is the pulse of justice. Quiet but persistent. It doesn't shout, it endures. After that day I stopped trying to leave no trace. Not because I wanted to be noticed, but because I wanted to belong. I brewed chamomile in my chipped cup and let the scent move through the kitchen. I baked bread and let its warm smell hang in the house for hours. I left my knitting bag on the couch, the yarn spilling soft and public across the cushions. I turned on the radio while I cooked and sang along to old songs. The villa absorbed these small marks of me like a ledger accepting new entries. I was no longer merely trying to fit into a perfect picture. I was placing my own handwriting across the margins of my life. When the diffuser's hum grew too sharp, Margaret reached over and unplugged it. In place of its sterile citrus mist, she set onions to soften in butter on the stove. Their smell filled the villa in a way no machine ever could. It was a rebellion, though quiet. Not shouts or slamming doors, but the small declaration of a life that refused to vanish. Later that evening, she returned to the table where the papers waited. The forged signature glared up at her. Margaret Hale in careful, practiced strokes. The K angled too cleanly, the M lacking the slight loop her hand always carried. She held it close to the lamp. The tremor in her hand wasn't weakness. It was recognition. The name was hers and not hers. She pictured Evelyn at her desk, slowly tracing the letters until they resembled Margaret's. She could see Dr. Vance watching, approving each curve, while Andrew hovered nearby in silence, complicit by doing nothing. The thought made her fingers shake, then stiffen. Slowly, deliberately, she let a smile rise, not of joy but of realization. The forgery was not defeat. It was confession. To copy her name was to reveal intent, and intent was stronger evidence than ink. She laid the page down, palms pressed firm against the table. For years she had held her tongue to spare Andrew discomfort, to keep her family smooth, to be the mother who accepted the smallest corner without protest. She had called that love. But staring at this false version of herself, she wondered if what she had called love was really just her own erasure. The question bore into her chest. Andrew was her son. She remembered him running barefoot across grass, cheeks bright with summer. She remembered his pencil tapping on the kitchen table as she checked his homework. She remembered Thomas lifting him high above his head and the boys' laughter filling their house. Could she stand against that boy grown into a man? Could she demand he acknowledge what Evelyn had set into motion with him at her side? Forgiveness had always come easily to Margaret. She forgave patients who shouted in fear, families who blamed nurses for what illness had already claimed. But this was different. Forgiveness here would not be grace. It would be permission, the very thing they expected her to give. She whispered into the stillness, "Should I forgive?" The silence answered back, "Forgiveness without consequence is surrender." Her choice was no longer between affection and anger. It was between dignity and disappearance. Margaret walked barefoot through the villa, her steps soft on the cold floor. She trailed her fingers along a chair's back, the lip of the counter, the frame of a doorway. Her touch left no visible trace, yet each one claimed, "I am here. I exist. I am not the shadow you imagined." In the living room she threw the window open. The Florida night drifted in, carrying salt and jasmine. The curtains lifted, folding and unfolding like sails. She pictured Evelyn frowning at the wrinkles, Andrew tugging them close to keep order intact. Margaret left them open. Let the air move freely. Let it crease the perfection. Later she sat again with the signature. On a scrap of paper she wrote her name in fresh blue ink. The difference was unmistakable. Her uneven pressure, the faint slant from the stiffness in her wrist. Realness carried flaws. Forgery carried polish. And in that difference Margaret recognized her power. Margaret's imperfections proved her presence, while their polished facades proved theirs false. She slipped the forged signature and her own declaration into a folder marked evidence, closing it gently. She no longer needed to hide her traces. Her presence, her writing, her proof, they were more enduring than silence. When she turned off the lamp, the villa fell into shadow, but inside her a steady glow remained. Silence had once been her shield. Now she recognized it could be a weapon too, quiet, precise, unyielding. Climbing into bed, she whispered the vow she had carried all day. She did not need to shout nor to plead, only to endure until truth revealed itself. She had gathered the proof, mailed it, photographed it, labeled it, and yet her mind refused to settle. In the curated hush of the villa at night, she rehearsed what she might say to Andrew, words she wished he could hear, though doubt lingered that he ever would. One afternoon she sat at the dining table, a blank sheet before her. Pale sunlight cut through the tall windows, sharp and honest. Her chipped cup rested at her side, tea gone cold. She lifted a pen and let her hand move freely. The first line she wrote read, "I will keep my dignity." Her eyes pricked as she read it back. It was not a threat, but a truth a mother should not need to declare. She wrote slowly, deliberately, of the down payment she had provided when they dreamed of the villa, of the nights she had stayed with the children so Andrew and Evelyn could travel, of Robert gone too soon, leaving her to bear the weight of family alone. She wrote of the letters, the forgery, the precision that had reduced her to leverage. She wrote without heat. Clarity carries weight, anger only carries fire. Folding the page into thirds, she slipped it into an envelope but did not seal it. Some letters are meant to be studied, not sent. She placed the envelope in the pocket of a faded gray cardigan, one she often wore in quiet evenings, pressing it flat against her palm. If the words were ever needed, they would be close. Until then, they rested near her heart like a hidden shield. That evening, she brewed fresh tea and stepped to the front door. She opened it, letting the breeze lift strands of her hair, feeling salt and faint smoke from a neighbor's grill. The narrow lawn stretched to the seawall, the water restless beyond it. One foot remained inside, one outside, the threshold framing her the way hospital doors had once framed her before entering a room where grief waited. She breathed deeply and then spoke softly to herself. "The next time I cross this door, I will walk straight. No more bent shoulders. No more lowered eyes." The ocean pulsed in response, pulling and returning, echoing her vow. She remembered the day she and Robert had first crossed the threshold of their little house together, carrying books and a second-hand sofa. The paint smelled fresh, the mortgage enormous, yet the joy was real. They had told themselves they were beginning. Now Margaret understood that thresholds mark more than beginnings. They mark the courage to stand fully in the life you claim. Thresholds mark choices. When to step forward, when to step back, when to hold your ground and refuse to bend. I glanced back at the villa, its white walls catching the last light of dusk. Beautiful, yes, but beauty without warmth cracks under pressure. I pictured Evelyn smoothing the counters, Andrew fussing over the thermostat, each thinking order could replace care. They had forgotten that love cannot be programmed like a machine. The envelope in my cardigan pocket weighed me with purpose, though the garment itself hung in the dresser. Those words, "Kodhajaha. But I will keep my dignity," were part of me now, unspoken but steadying my spine. I lingered at the doorway until the sky deepened to violet, porch light flickering softly. At last I stepped fully outside, leaving the door behind like a jar unlatched. Across the lawn to the seawall, the waves whispered secrets and promises. I murmured to the water, "I am ready. Ready not for conflict, but for truth. Ready to protect myself even if it means leaving them behind." Turning to the villa, its windows gleamed pale and expressionless, yet I no longer felt like a shadow within them. I felt solid, poised at the edge of something wider, freer. When they returned Sunday evening, the air smelled faintly of salt and diesel, the light bruised and purple over the water. I sat on the porch, chipped cup in hand, tea long cold. I did not rise as their car rolled up. Gravel crunched, headlights swept the lawn, then faded. Doors opened and closed efficiently. Evelyn's laughter reached me first, too bright, too practiced. Andrew followed, grunting as he hauled suitcases from the trunk. They didn't notice me immediately. I watched their silhouettes framed by the porch glow. They climbed the steps, keys jingling. Andrew froze, key suspended when our eyes met. "Mom," he said cautious. "I am," I replied, steady, neither warm nor cold. Evelyn stepped forward, faint smile on her lips. "You didn't have to wait. We expected you'd be in bed." "I wasn't waiting," I said simply. A long pause stretched between us, filled with the sound of the ocean and faint insects in the garden. Andrew cleared his throat, finally turning the key. The door clicked open. They carried their luggage inside and I remained on the porch, letting the space hold me. When Andrew returned to the threshold, his face tight, jaw set, he spoke slowly. "Mom, I need to ask you something. I want the truth." I held his gaze. "Then ask," I said. He glanced toward Evelyn arranging the mail. His voice lowered. "What did you take from the safe?" The question hung heavily, almost a confession itself. I let silence answer first. Then I spoke. "I didn't take anything, Andrew. I only reclaimed the truth." Nathan's shoulders stiffened. He tried to mask it, but the shift was clear. He had expected confusion, maybe anger, not calm, not certainty. Evelyn's voice drifted from inside, clipped, precise. "We should all sit and have a civil conversation." I didn't move. "I am already seated," I replied, eyes fixed on Nathan. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, the porch light cutting shadows across a face older than the boy I remembered. "Mom," he began softer this time, "why would you go through our things? Why open something that wasn't yours?" I let the chipped cup rest on the table. When lies hide in plain sight, truth doesn't need permission to be found. His mouth opened, then closed again. Silence thickened, pressing between us. Evelyn stepped onto the porch, her linen dress crisp despite travel, arms crossed. "If there's been a misunderstanding, we can explain. But touching private files, that's a violation." Her words floated but didn't reach me. I turned back to Nathan. "Do you call it private when my name is forged? When my sacrifice is counted as leverage?" He flinched slightly. Evelyn's expression hardened. She started to speak again, but Nathan raised a hand, silencing her. For the first time he looked at me fully, without pretense, lips pressed tight, eyes clouded. 3 figures sat in the heavy air, bound not by blood alone but by its fracture. Finally Nathan spoke, voice low. "What are you going to do?" I leaned back, hands folded. "Nothing tonight. The truth exists regardless. I mailed it to myself. Bears a stamp and a date, Nathan. It will arrive with the weight of law behind it." Evelyn hissed softly. Nathan stared at the porch boards, wrestling with himself and the man he had become. I felt no tension. That silence was mine now, steady, unyielding. Minutes stretched while the ocean marked time behind us. I rose, the boards creaking beneath me, and set the chipped cup down gently. "You both look tired. Travel wears people down. Rest tonight. Tomorrow comes with or without excuses." I paused at the threshold, hand on the frame, staring out at the dark, endless sea. Spine straight, vow alive inside me. The next time I cross a door, I will do it standing tall. I left them on the porch, their silence heavier than mine, and for the first time, I felt not like a guest, but the keeper of the house's truth. The next morning, the villa throbbed with tension. Evelyn moved through the kitchen like a blade, cupboards opening sharply, drawers slamming. She didn't look at me, but her anger filled the air. Finally she faced me, smile gone, voice clipped. Margaret, what exactly did you do while we were gone? I set my chipped cup on the table, calm. I lived here. I watered the orchids. I made tea. And I read what you left unlocked. Her eyes narrowed. I said nothing. Silence is sharper than denial. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. Touching things that weren't yours. Private matters. You've crossed a line. I moved deliberately to the desk in the corner of the living room where my laptop waited. I opened it and navigated to the program Mary had helped me set up. Within moments, her face filled the screen. Her glasses perched low on her nose, gray-streaked hair pulled into a tidy bun. "Good morning, Margaret," she said warmly. Then her eyes widened as she took in the two figures behind me. "I assume this is your son and his wife?" I turned the screen slightly so they could see. Evelyn stiffened. Thomas lingered near the back, his expression pale. Evelyn forced a brittle laugh. "And who are you?" Mary's gaze was steady. "My name is Mary Collins. I worked with Margaret for 20 years in the hospital. Now I work in a family law office. I've seen your letters and understand what you intended." The color drained from Evelyn's face. She glanced at Thomas, but he kept his gaze down. Mary held up a printed page. "This, for instance, from Dr. Harold Vance. If Thomas resists signing the revised trust this month, direct pressure toward his mother. Encourage a sense of indebtedness. Frame housing as care and cost. Do you deny this is your handwriting, Evelyn?" Evelyn's lips parted, then pressed together. Her silence was confession enough. Mary lifted another page. "And here is a draft power of attorney with Margaret's forged signature. The slant of the K is too precise, the tail of the M inconsistent. Forgery is serious. Do you dispute it?" Thomas shifted uncomfortably, shoulders bent, eyes still cast downward. Evelyn's voice cracked. "You had no right to go through those papers." I stepped closer, calm but firm. "And you had no right to use my name as ink for your plans. Privacy is not a shield for deceit." Evelyn's face flushed red, composure slipping. "You don't understand. We were securing the future. For the children, for Thomas, for all of us. You should have trusted us." I met her gaze. "Trust is not built on secrets. The future you describe erases me while holding my sacrifice in your pocket." Mary's voice came through the screen, precise and unwavering. "Margaret has full legal standing to claim her investment. We have documentation of her transfers and now your own letters describing it as leverage. If you want to take this to court, we can. But Margaret prefers resolution in writing, not litigation." The silence that followed weighed heavier than any shouting could. Evelyn looked like she might argue, but her words faltered. Thomas finally raised his head, eyes meeting mine for the first time. Not with anger but with shame. I spoke slowly, letting each word land. "The money I contributed must be recognized in writing. Black and white. Nothing more, nothing less. You can keep the villa if you wish. I will keep my dignity." Evelyn crossed her arms tightly, her face pale. "This is absurd." Mary leaned closer to the camera. "What's absurd is believing you could erase a woman who built this family with her hands and her sacrifice. Margaret Hale is not invisible. Not anymore." The room held its breath. Even the faint hum of the refrigerator seemed to pause. Thomas lowered his gaze as if the weight of everything revealed pressed on his shoulders. I closed the laptop quietly, leaving the conversation suspended but far from resolved. Silence now carried more power than any raised voice ever could. I looked at Evelyn one last time. You built a house of glass, Evelyn, and forgot how glass reflects. Her shoulders stiffened and she turned away. Thomas remained bent under the truth, still processing. I returned to my chair on the porch, picked up my chipped cup and let the breeze move through me. I had not shouted, I had not begged. I had spoken only the truth and placed paper where silence had lived, and that was enough. The following morning the villa felt different. The air no longer hummed with Evelyn's curated calm. It carried something raw, guilt, fear, and tension. I moved slowly through the kitchen, pouring tea into my cup, letting the hiss and bubble of the water fill the quiet they could not occupy. Thomas sat at the table, elbows resting on polished wood. He looked older, lines cutting deeper around his mouth. Evelyn lingered near the window, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the horizon as if the ocean could script an excuse. Finally, Thomas spoke, voice low. Mom, you have to understand. We only wanted to make sure you were settled. We wanted peace for you. I lifted the cup and took a measured sip. His words, dressed in kindness, carried the same weight as the forged papers. I set the cup down, the crack in its glaze catching the light. No, I said slowly, deliberate. You didn't want me at peace. You wanted me quiet. The sentence hung insistent and ringing. Thomas opened his mouth, then faltered. Evelyn shifted, linen brushing the glass, a soft sound. For years, my life had been about keeping the peace. Folding towels to her standards, speaking softly, leaving no trace in the villa. I had thought compliance was care, silence was love. Speaking the truth aloud broke that spell. For the first time, Thomas sat in quiet while I named the reality. It wasn't like that, he murmured. We just thought it was best. I leaned forward, calm but precise. Best for whom? You, who could control the house without resistance. Evelyn, who decided what counted as family and what didn't. Or me, who would shrink smaller and smaller until I disappeared entirely. The silence that followed was long, heavy. Even the refrigerator's hum seemed to pause. In the hospital, I had learned the power of waiting. A patient in denial often filled the silence with truth. Families confessed when a nurse simply held the space. I let Thomas and Evelyn feel the same weight now. Evelyn finally snapped, brittle. You're twisting everything. We opened our home to you. Gave you a room. I interrupted, calm and exact. You gave me walls, not a home. Space but not dignity. You smiled while writing letters that labeled me leverage. Her face paled and she looked away. Thomas rubbed his temples. We were under pressure, he said softly. The mortgage, the children, the future. It all felt heavy. We thought if we structured everything carefully, no one would have to worry later. I met his eyes. And did you ever consider the weight I already carried? The long shifts I worked to make sure you never went hungry. The money I gave when you and Evelyn wanted this villa? You dressed control as care, Thomas, but control is not love. He swallowed, fingers tightening against the table. For a moment I almost reached across, almost softened. But the memory of the forged signature stopped me, the line that turned my name into a tool. I whispered more to myself than to them. You wanted me quiet and I almost gave you that. Almost. The echo of my words hung in the kitchen, steady and deliberate. I carried my cup to the sink. The simple act felt enormous, choosing when to move, when to speak, when to be still. My reflection in the window showed a woman unbowed, present, not erased. Behind me, chairs scraped softly. Thomas muttered under his breath. Evelyn tried again, voice higher, almost pleading. You could forgive us. Families forgive. I dried the cup on one of her stiff towels, folded it carefully over the counter, and spoke quietly but firmly. Forgiveness requires truth, and you haven't offered any. Not yet. The silence returned thicker than before. They waited. I gave them nothing. My silence was no longer submission. It was chosen power. I left the kitchen and stepped onto the porch. Evening air carried salt and hibiscus. I stood at the threshold, back straight, letting the quiet sea echo what I had already said. They wanted me silent. Now they would learn the difference between being silenced and choosing silence as a weapon. By the third morning, the villa felt like a waiting room. No music, no clatter of pans, only the faint hum of air moving through vents. I brewed tea and watched Thomas pace, phone in hand, while Evelyn stared at the stove as if the flame might tell her what to say. Finally he stopped. "Mom," he said carefully, voice measured like a doctor before a critical decision. "I spoke with the bank and an attorney. We will repay your down payment. We will put it in writing." I set my cup on the counter and met his gaze. "Paper," I said, deliberate. "Not promises." He nodded. "Paper." He pulled out a chair, sat, and slid a printed draft toward me. The numbers were there. The date of my transfer, the amount with fair appreciation, a schedule if needed, and a clause acknowledging the housing costs until repayment. Evelyn did not sit. She stood behind him, arms crossed so tightly the linen dug into her skin. Her eyes were dry, the shine gone. Only calculation remained. She said nothing. I read every line carefully. I asked 2 adjustments Mary had trained me to request. First, remove the word gift. Second, add a line acknowledging my years of caring for the children while they built their life in this villa. Thomas adjusted the draft without hesitation. The printer coughed new pages, warm ink rising into the room. We signed with blue pens. The sound of nibs scratching on paper was louder than the ocean outside. I watched my name appear in my own hand. Imperfect, human, real. Thomas signed next, fingers trembling slightly. Evelyn added only her initials in the witness line. When it was done, Thomas folded the copies, slid one across the table. "This is yours," he said. I held the folder. "Look at me, Thomas." He met my eyes. In them I saw the boy counting pennies at the grocery store, and the man who had forgotten the cost of what he was given. "I accept what is due," I said. "But money is not the medicine here." He lowered his gaze. I saw Evelyn shift. The fight had left her, leaving quiet reflection in its wake. What remained was the figure of someone who had learned the difference between control and care. Evelyn said lightly, "We can move forward now." "You can move forward." I replied, "I already am." I walked to my bedroom and opened the top drawer. The gray cardigan lay where I had left it, its pocket holding the unsent letter I had written. I removed the envelope and returned to the kitchen. The scent of eucalyptus lingered. Someone had plugged the diffuser back in. I switched it off. Real air belongs in endings. I placed the letter in the center of the counter, not hidden, simply present. I pressed my hand on it as I once pressed gauze to a wound. Thomas watched silently. "What is that?" he asked. "High clarity," I said. "Read it after I leave or never. It changes nothing now." He reached for the folder I still held. I let him take it, then accepted it back. When he returned it carefully into my hands, the gesture carried a truth heavier than apology. I tucked it into my bag and zipped it closed, the teeth catching briefly before sliding together smoothly. Evelyn whispered, "Where will you go home?" "A new one," I said. I carried the chipped cup to the sink and washed it slowly and thoroughly. I dried it with one of her towels, folding it in halves rather than thirds. The cup went into my bag, clinking softly like a small bell. At the door I paused, one hand on the frame. The seawall held the tide like a stern jaw. The sky stretched pale and steady like freshly pressed scrubs. I straightened my back. I did not glance to see if they followed. Thresholds are best crossed without witnesses. "Thomas," I said into the light without turning, "send me the final signed scan before the bank closes today." My voice held the authority of a doctor ordering medicine on time. He answered quickly, "Yes," relief in his tone. I stepped onto the porch, then down to the path. With each step, the villa receded behind me. My breath grew lighter. At the gate, I paused and listened. Inside, the house maintained its perfect temperature. Papers rested on the counter beneath a letter that would speak when ready. I opened the gate and walked toward the street, the sun warming my shoulders like a benediction. Severance is not a cut when chosen. It is a suture, skin meeting skin in a new line. And this line is mine irrevocably. The morning I left, the villa looked the same. Polished surfaces, trimmed orchids, floors shining. But I felt no obligation to preserve its perfection. My duty here was finished. I packed quietly. I did not own much. Some sweaters folded neatly into a suitcase, my notebook stacked beside them. I added my small collection of paperbacks, their spines softened from years of rereading. The chipped teacup went into the side pocket, wrapped in a dish towel. It had survived every stage of this battle, proof that imperfection endures where perfection falters. On the dresser lay Robert's watch, the one I had carried through so many days, though it no longer ticked. I pressed it into my palm, recalling the weight of his hand guiding Thomas across the street when he was still a boy. That watch would come with me, not for time, but as a reminder that love once true leaves traces no forgery can erase. I looked around the room one last time. The bed was neatly made, the curtains drawn back. Nothing claimed me here anymore. That was relief. I closed the suitcase and lifted it, surprised by its lightness. At the front door, I paused at the threshold. For months I had crossed this line bent and quiet, carrying the weight of gratitude I was expected to show. This time I stood straight, ready to step forward entirely on my own. Now I stood upright, taller than I had in years, as if the truth itself had braced my spine with steel. My hand rested on the door frame, deliberate and steady. Beyond it, the seawall glimmered in the morning light, the waves catching the sun like scattered silver coins. The breeze carried the tang of salt and freshly cut grass. I drew a deep breath, letting the air fill me fully, unscripted by anyone else. I murmured, "This is the last time." Then I stepped forward, crossing into the light without a backward glance. The gravel crunched beneath my shoes as I rolled my suitcase down the drive. Each step felt less like leaving and more like reclaiming myself, the woman I had been before silence became my survival. At the end of the drive, Andrew was trimming his hedges. He squinted against the sun, then lifted a hand in greeting, a soft smile breaking across his lined face. "Well now," he said, resting his shears on the fence, "you look different today, Margaret." "Do I?" I asked, adjusting the strap on my shoulder. He nodded, eyes warm, lighter than before, as though a weight had been lifted. I let a quiet laugh escape, genuine and soft. Maybe I finally did. Andrew studied me a moment longer, then tipped his cap. "Good. That house never suited you. You weren't built for silence that heavy." His words struck me as undeniable truth. I raised my hand in a small wave and kept walking, the suitcase rolling steadily along the sidewalk, the villa shrinking behind me. Some doors demand no farewell. The cottage stood by a quiet lake, its blue door bright against crisp white siding. Orange trees leaned toward the water, heavy with fruit, leaves sparkling in the Florida sun. It was modest, unpolished. And yet, as I stepped onto the small porch, I felt it was mine. The air carried a different silence than the villa had. A living, breathing quiet, moving with the rustle of leaves, the hum of dragonflies, and the gentle lap of water at the shore. I set the suitcase down and exhaled, feeling months of tension leave me. Inside, the rooms were simple. A narrow kitchen with worn tiles, a living room with floors that creaked underfoot, a single bedroom with a lake-facing window. Nothing gleamed, nothing pretended. Every surface invited touch. The first thing I unpacked was a wind chime I had bought at the market weeks earlier. Delicate ceramic leaves dangling from twisted wire. I carried it to the back door and hung it from the eave. When the breeze caught it, the uneven notes rang softly, imperfect, like laughter breaking through sorrow. I closed my eyes, letting it mark a beginning. I spent the morning unpacking slowly. Books lined the shelves, notebooks placed in a neat row. Robert's watch rested gently on the bedside table. The chipped teacup found a home in a cabinet alongside a few well-used mugs. I brewed tea, letting the steam curl through the modest rooms, no one to scold me for leaving the aroma behind. By noon, the sound of a truck pulling up startled me. I wiped my hands on my cardigan and stepped outside. Thomas stood by the open tailgate holding a box. He looked weary, yet less guarded than when I had last seen him. "I thought I'd bring the rest of your things," he said carefully, as if testing the air. I nodded and moved to meet him. "Thank you," I said. Thomas set the box on the floor beside the low bookshelf, his eyes wandering around the cottage, lingering on the blue door, the kitchen window, the small personal touches that made this place mine. "It fits you," he remarked finally. "Feels calm." I didn't answer, busying myself with cutting the twine from the box, revealing my knitting bag and a stack of framed photographs. Nathan lingered near the window. "Mom," he said softly, "you look at peace." I placed one of the photos on the shelf, Robert holding Nathan when he was small. The frame wobbled slightly under my hand and I steadied it, then looked at my son. His eyes sought mine, searching for words. I gave him none. Silence, once my cage, was now my reply. He would learn to listen. I returned to the shelf, adjusting the books, arranging them not by color or height but by memory. My quiet said all that needed saying. I didn't need apologies. I didn't need explanations. I had chosen peace and it belonged to me alone. Outside, the ceramic chimes stirred in the breeze, their uneven song drifting into the room. Nathan's gaze flicked toward them, then back at me. His lips pressed together. He nodded once, understanding. "I'll leave you to settle in," he said at last, walking toward the door. He paused, then added, "If you need anything." His sentence hung unfinished. "Some offers are better left that way." He opened the blue door, stepped outside, and closed it behind him. Alone in the cottage, the chimes echoing softly, I lifted the chipped cup that had accompanied me through so much. I drank slowly, letting the warmth anchor me in this space, in this new life. For the first time in years, I didn't wait for approval. I didn't hope for thanks. I didn't shrink to fit someone else's design. The cottage demanded nothing of me, only that I exist. And I did. In this small lakeside home, my notebook rests on the kitchen table, morning light spilling across its pages, catching on mug rings and the faint scratches of long use. I write after tea when the world has yet to make its requests. Words come slowly, but they come. I remind the page what the villa tried to erase. That a woman's worth is not measured by how quietly she occupies space. I note small triumphs, the things that steady my breath, my spine, my signature in ink that is unmistakably mine. Today I write the sentence I wish someone had spoken to me years ago. You are not something to discard. You are the foundation that once held a house upright. I dot the period, feeling the lines steady me like a hand at my back. The cottage makes no argument. The wind slips through the citrus leaves and the chime answers softly. I think of the forged signature, so flawless it seemed machine-made, and my own beside it, uneven in the way the living always are. I whisper my truth. I only reclaim the truth. Evenings I sit on the porch with the chipped teacup, the lake breathing small ripples against the bank. The wind chime sings its uneven song, some notes clear, some hesitant, all honest. I let the steam warm my face and release my shoulders. Healing does not announce itself with fanfare. It flows quietly like water shaping a new shore. I remember the villa's sterile stillness, how each step felt like trespass. Here the floor creaks underfoot, the air smells of oranges and rain, and no one asks me to vanish. I am alone, and yet the quiet does not press against me. Sometimes I think about forgiveness, how easily it is mistaken for surrender. I will not carry bitterness. It is heavy and eats at the hours. But I will carry boundaries. They are light, steady, and keep the heart aligned. My silence is no longer a prison. It is a voice tuned to its own clear note. When Nathan paused at the blue door and remarked that I looked peaceful, I let the wind answer for me. Some apologies cannot rebuild what was broken. Some restitution cannot repay what was taken. And still I wish him well. I wish Evelyn the wisdom to favor warmth over control. This afternoon I open the notebook again and write a quiet affirmation for myself. You are not something to discard. You are the foundation that once held a home together. I underline it once and close the cover with both hands. Outside, the lake brightens as clouds drift across the sky. The wind chime replies with a soft, uneven note. I step onto the porch and settle into the wooden chair facing the water. The cup in my hands is warm. Its crack gleams like a healed scar. I inhale deeply, knowing this breath belongs only to me. Whatever anyone calls this ending, I recognize its true name. It is not revenge. It is repair. I have only reclaimed the truth. I set the notebook aside and let the evening light settle around me. The porch holds me gently without expectation or question. The chipped cup warms my fingers. The wind chime hums a quiet answer. Somewhere across the lake, a bird rises into the fading sky. I smile softly, firmly. I am here. I am complete. The truth rests beside me, silent, steady, and whole. The chime answers.